Hey everyone, happy Monday, March 9th. I'm Endrit Sella and this is Capital Markets Quickie. Let's jump into what's driving the week ahead. Quick note before we dive in. Today's episode is brought to you by AMF Capital Asset Management Frankfurt. Learn more about our funds and strategies at amf-capital.de. Alright, let's dive right in. Two major reports on prices are coming out just days before the Federal Reserve meets again next week to decide on interest rates. And as you might imagine, markets are paying very close attention, especially after the recent volatility in energy prices and the ongoing debate about whether borrowing costs could move lower later this year. The first key report arrives on Wednesday when we get the Consumer Price Index for February. The previous reading in January actually surprised to the downside, so investors will be watching closely to see whether inflation is continuing to cool or whether price pressures are starting to pick up again. Then later in the week, we'll see the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index for January, which is the inflation gauge the Federal Reserve tends to focus on most. The last report showed prices rising faster than expected, so this new data could shape expectations for what the Fed does at its meeting next week. Meanwhile, there's also plenty happening in the housing market. We'll get fresh numbers on existing home sales, housing starts, and other housing indicators, all of which will give investors a sense of whether activity in the property market is finally stabilizing after a long stretch of weak demand. At the same time, markets will also be watching consumer sentiment data, which could reveal whether recent geopolitical tensions in the Middle East are beginning to affect spending behavior. Now, beyond the macro data, it's also a big week for corporate earnings, particularly in technology. Investors are still trying to figure out the strength of the AI trade, and several major companies reporting results could offer new clues. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise kicks things off today, with analysts looking for insights into spending on artificial intelligence infrastructure and enterprise technology. Later in the week, Oracle will report earnings as well. The company's stock has fallen sharply since its highs last autumn, but it's still pushing ahead with massive investment plans, including a proposal to raise roughly $50 billion to fund new artificial intelligence data centers. Then, we'll also hear from Adobe, which could give investors another read on demand across the software industry. Outside of technology, there's also a wave of retail earnings. Discount retailer Dollar General is set to report results, and its numbers could provide insight into how American consumers are coping with higher living costs. If the company continues to see strong demand, that may suggest households are still feeling pressure from prices. We'll also hear from companies like Campbell's, Ulta, and Petco, giving investors a broader view of spending across food, beauty, and pet products. And finally, investors will also be paying attention to the electric vehicle market in China, where competitors to Tesla, including Li Auto and NIO, are scheduled to release earnings and could provide a fresh snapshot of demand in one of the world's most important EV markets. So overall, between inflation data, housing indicators, and a busy earnings calendar, the upcoming week should offer plenty of signals about where the economy and the markets may be heading next. Alright, that wraps up today's Capital Markets Quickie. Join me again tomorrow morning for more market updates. See you then.